Next up, we need to make our app component. And the app component is going to be sort of like the mama component that's going to hold all of our children. And then inside of that, we're going to have like a header component, which is going to show us the title. We're going to have a bunch of fish components, which are going to render out a picture and the title, a description, and the ability to add it to our order. Then we have an order component here and an inventory component. And all of these things are going to be siblings, and they will all be a child of the app component, which is going to allow us to share things like data. So if I were to change this data to a different value, it's going to update across all three of them. It's going to allow us to share things like methods, where if I were to remove a fish from here, it's going to remove it from here, as well as update our order. That's going to sort of centralize all of both the data and the functionality, the events that need to happen. So let's go back over to our catch of the day and open up our sidebar that we got here. By the way, maybe I should show you that real quick. If you're wondering why sometimes when I like goof up the indentation, or if I use a single quote or a double quote, something like that, and then I give it a save and it just all automatically fixed for me, that's because I'm using something called Prettier, and you can go ahead and find an extension for your editor called Prettier. And it's great for React because it'll often do things like maybe, for example, in here, if I have like an open hi tag, and it'll automatically close the hi tag. And then if I were to give that a save, it says, oh, well, there's nothing in between here. There's no child. So why don't you just self-close? There's a lot of like nice little fixes that you can get when you turn on Prettier. It's totally different for every single editor, and even in VS Code, you can either configure it via the Prettier plugin or via an ESLint. So I'm going to leave that to another tutorial, but definitely check that out if you're getting a little bit frustrated with the formatting in React. So we want to go into our components here. I'm going to make a new file in the components directory. I'm going to call that app.js with a capital A. Good. Give that a save. And inside of that, what is the first thing we need? Well, we need React. We need to import that from our React package. Then we need to make our app component. So we'll say class app, capital A, extends react.component. And then let's go ahead. Before you even do that, I often will like start typing the render method. But before you even do that, go ahead and export default app, because the amount of times that I forgot to actually export it from a file, that just causes headaches. So export it right away. You might even want to make a nice little snippet for your editor that does exactly this. Now, inside of it, we need our render method, which shows what we have. And from that, we're going to return. And I showed you in a couple of videos ago how I like to return parentheses. And inside of that, let's just give ourselves maybe a div with a class of catch of the day. Beautiful. And just put a paragraph. Hey. Good. Now we will go back to our app, and if I refresh it, nothing's changed. And that's because if we go back to our index.js file, we're still hard coding the store picker, which is good for the front page. But as soon as let me show you, that's the store picker. But as soon as I go to an actual page, then I want to change to the app. And we're gonna figure out how to do that with routing. But for now, let's just hard code that app component. So we'll duplicate this one here and change it over to the app component. And then we will just render out the app component. Getting some errors here. Your render method should have a return statement. So go back to our app.js and how does return even work? You have to be able to spell in order to code. Okay, so I've got my app component working, and if we go to our React, you see that the React DevTools that we have our app component rendering out. Inside of that, we have a div with a class name of catch of the day. Then inside of that, we'll give ourselves a div with a class of menu. Again, make sure you hit that class name instead of class. And inside of that, we are going to, let's just scaffold out what the components are that we're going to make. So we're going to have a header component, and that's going to look like this. Now it's going to start erroring out on us because we haven't yet made that component. And then underneath that, we're going to have a bunch of fish components, and it's going to look a little something like that. So we haven't gotten there yet. So just put the header in there for now. Beside that, we want an inventory component, And beside that, we also want an order component. Now it's going to tell us that header, inventory, and order do not work. Ooh, that's cool. If you click it, it automatically opens it up in the editor. I didn't know that. Neat. So that's kind of cool. It'll go right to the file where the thing is broken. So let's go ahead and make a header, inventory, and order component. So back to our components folder, new file. We'll call it header.js. And if you want to, at this point, maybe code it by hand once more, but you're probably going to be copying and pasting it fairly often. So we'll import React from React. And then we'll class header extends react.component. That needs a render method. We'll come back to that in just a second. And then we'll export default header. Then inside of the render method, we're going to return an actual header tag. So this is just a regular HTML header tag with a class of top. And inside of that, let's just give ourselves h1 that says catch of the day. We'll come back to the styling of that in just a second. Underneath that, we want an h3 with a class of tagline. These are just matching up with all the styles that I've pre-written for you. And then inside of that, we need a span that just says fresh daily or whatever it is that you like to show. We're going to swap that out. Not going to hard code it in just a second. So give that a save. And if you don't want to see how it works, then we'll go back to our app. We'll just comment out inventory and order real quick. And we should, why doesn't it work? Well, we have made the header component, but we have not yet imported it into the file that we need. So this is kind of interesting. We don't need to import it into our index.js. It's unnecessary to import things that are not used in that exact file. You just need to import it into the file where it's going to be used. So import the header from, and now it's a sibling. We're already in the components folder in a file called app.js. So we'll just go to a sibling and we'll say import it from the header.js file. Now, if I give that a save, it should show us the header. Oh, now it's giving me some grief here. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. What did we do inside of app? What do we do inside of here? Oh, obviously that h3 tag needs to go inside of the header tag. And then you see that this is showing up for us, which looks great. And let's just get it matched up to what this looks like. I have spans wrapped around the of the and then around each of the words of and the. So we'll go back to our header.js and it's of. Put of and the on its own line. And we're going to wrap the entire thing in a class of the. And then we're going to wrap each of the words in a span with the class of and a span with the class of the. So h1 catch span with the class of the. Then you get an of and the, and then finally the day. And that should, there we go. We get the little anchor and the formatting, the CSS has kicked in. And if we open this up, you see app and we have our header component. Let's go off and finish the other two, which is our inventory and our order component. Actually, those go the other way around. It's the order and then the inventory component. It's going to start yelling at us because we haven't yet imported them. So what I like to do is just duplicate this over and then select order and then do that again for inventory. Now it's going to tell us that it cannot find a component called inventory because we haven't yet made it. So we'll go in, and what I like to do in a case like this is just to save a copy of header and just make that inventory. And then I will get rid of all the HTML inside of there, and we'll just return a div with a class of inventory. And then rename the component. This is kind of important. Sometimes I forget to, it will still work if you export it as header. However, it will show up as header in your DevTools, which is a bit confusing. So make sure you rename that to inventory. And that's up and running. One actually cool thing that Prettier does for me is if it just does a one-liner, you're using parentheses here, and you only have a one-liner, it's going to tell you, hey, that's not necessary. I can do that on one line. So it'll just get rid of them. So we might have to put those back in at a later time. I'll save that again. give ourselves an order.js. Remember to use capitals on all these file names. We'll just call this order. Give a div the class name of order. Beautiful. So we have our order in the middle, our inventory on the right, and our catch of the day. Obviously, I am too squished here, so I'm going to bring that down to the bottom. And everything is looking good. I also have this cheesy little fold button here, which has nothing to do with React. It's just when it's checked, it will apply some CSS that puts a transform and skew on this to make it look a little bit 3D. Kind of fun to have on. So that is a sort of a scaffold out of our application. We have the main bones. Let's move on to the next one, which is talking about how do we make this header component somewhat dynamic, because we have just been hard coding the values in there.